start over. Welcome to Strengthening Data Literacy. I'm Rachel Leventhal-Weiner. My role in state government is the Director of Evaluation and Impact. So I'm with the Office of Policy and Management, and I sit in the Data and Policy Analytics Unit. So I work with our state's Chief Data Officer and the team that runs the Open Data Portal, that runs our statewide longitudinal data system, and that manages our Geographic Information Office. So we do a fair amount, and we're a team of about 12 or 13 now, but even a year ago, we were a very small team of about 4 or so folks. So we're excited to work with you, and this role that I'm in is new because with American Rescue Plan projects popping up all over state business, we have a new and different opportunity to think about how we're using data. So today, our goals are really to talk about some of the ways that you are already a data person or might be building some of those data person skills. Those might feel basic to some, and some might feel like more advanced data people. But I think being in conversation together around some of the ways we're already using data are really important to call attention to the ways that we can be using data in our everyday work, the ways we think we are, the ways we might not be already. I want to talk a little bit about data neutrality, and that's a concept that I've worked with different sort of community groups around how to think about where data come from and some of the choices that make data more subjective than we think. And being a data person means being very curious about where data come from, and data neutrality and thinking about sort of the objectivity and subjectivity in data work in general. It's really important to knowing, to sort of helping shape how we as an organization choose what we collect and how we analyze it. And I want to talk a little bit about the data lifecycle, where data come from, the kinds of steps that are needed to think about what to do with it when we have it on hand. One thing to manage expectations is that in a workshop around strengthening data literacy, folks might be hopeful that we're going to be doing really deep analytical things or using actual tools. We're not going to do those things today, but I am very excited to find out what you're interested in learning so that we can shape workshops towards your interests, your skill level, and make those things really appropriate and useful. The goal of today is really to build on some of what we did last week, but you'll see some overlap in the building data culture discussion and start thinking a little bit about how we ask questions and how we match questions with information to get answers. Um, so a couple of things, and like I said, if folks came to the Building a Data Culture workshop, you're going to see some overlap, some repetition, and that's okay. We use a number of terms interchangeably. They mean different things in different circles, and so I just want to be really clear that if something's unclear to you or you use it in a different way, please stop me and ask a question. Um, this takes time, so we're not going to solve everything today, and the work cannot be done alone. And our unit within OPM is really meant to be your partner. So just know that you have folks who are willing to kind of troubleshoot and ask questions or work with you on different challenges that you're facing in your work. That's really our job. And to be honest, I've been doing this work now both in the social sector, the nonprofit space, and in state government for over 6 years, and there's no shortage of great questions. There's no shortage of good work to be done, and no shortage of opportunities really to just kind of learn something new for both folks who are comfortable with data and folks who are still growing their skills. So just to set the context a little bit, my role and the role of my partner, my colleague, Augusta Irachuku, who's our analyst within the Evaluation and Impact Unit, my role was actually created after the American Rescue Plan Act funding came to the state of Connecticut. So as the pandemic sort of progressed, the American Rescue Plan Act was passed in 2021, and our state received $2.8 billion from the U.S. Treasury Department. This funding is a little bit different than if your agency receives funding from another federal funding source. Often you're accountable just to that funding, that funder. You understand the reporting expectations and compliance of that funder. In this case, the U.S. Treasury Department really crafted the compliance expectations with an eye towards the use of evidence. And a lot of that is building on the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act that was passed officially in 2018, signed into law in 2019 at the federal level. And this has given us a really unique opportunity to focus on using data and research to guide both how we make investment in programmatic decisions, as well as how we judge what's working and the impact that we're making. So if your agency has an American Rescue Plan funded project, you've been in touch with my budget colleagues here at OPM, potentially me. We've got 32 agencies that have projects funded by the U.S. Treasury Department and have worked with us to talk through whether you need evidence, how you're going to do a program evaluation. This is really good for all state business, though. So one of the things we recognize here in our data and policy analytics unit is that this is good for all work. So we're going to start by supporting the American Rescue Plan funded projects because that's the charge that I was given. But we can't necessarily limit this work to just our colleagues doing those, working on those projects. So that's why we have folks from around state government who may or may not be working on something funded by the American Rescue Plan. And we're so happy to have all of you because as we begin this work and walk on this path, we're just bringing along people with us. So my goal is really to help you sort of expand the lenses that you use in your work, hopefully use information in a new and different way, and especially for those who are working with American Rescue Plan Act funds to actually help make the compliance and reporting easier on you and on your agency. So strengthening your data literacy starts with seeing data. And if you're a data person already, and if you've worked with me in the past, you know I believe everyone is a data person. Many people start out by saying, "Well, I'm not really a data person," but or "Oh, I'll ask the data person in the agency." But every person working in state government it will really have this imperative now to be data people, and you're already using data all the time. So often people will tell me they don't think they're a data person, but I like to say, I stop the conversation and I say, you're already a data person. You're using data all the time. And the data that you're using helps you make decisions in your everyday life. So you check the weather in the morning to make sure that you're dressed appropriately to be in the weather. New England has been a really weird winter. We've had a very strange weather pattern where we've gotten really comfortable. Right now it's 43 degrees outside. It's also the middle of February. It should probably be a little colder. It's going to be warmer this week, which is strange. But we use that weather data to make decisions around whether we go outside, whether we make outdoor plans, if we're going to bring an umbrella or not. We aren't leaving our homes as much, but it does really guide how we think about what we're going to do that day, that week, that month. Um, we are, I think that that geographic information is actually something that we don't realize how much we're using all the time. Our handheld devices are pinged to satellites that can tell us where we are, where the nearest gas station is, where the nearest drugstore is located. It can help us get directions to places we've never been before, or maybe the faster route to places we've gone many times. And all of that data, I mean, I think about it all the time because I'm a data person. Every time we use that geographic information, and I have a geographic information colleague on the call, the routes improve and the information around the distance and the locations of things improves. And so that's a very responsive source of data. And the thing that I think we overlook is all of the interactions we have on social media and the different ways that we're using qualitative information, the things that we like, the things that we search. And I don't want to get too big brotherish or get too far into the artificial intelligence space, but every time we use information where we're liking something or sharing or commenting, we're building information and also inviting more information to be sent our way. I'm here for it, to be honest. I like social media to tell me the things I need because sometimes I don't have time to find them. And often the things that get sent my way are the right ones for me. But I know that lots of people have suspicions about how these data are used. There's not enough time in this conversation for that discussion. But all of this is to say you're already more of a data person than you realize. And so by seeing the data that's all around you, that's one place where you can start to strengthen the data literacy that you have. Um, Often people think that data people are numbers, making facts and figures, making charts and reports. But I want to be really careful about how we talk about data because data are more than just numbers. Um, Interpreting facts and figures is one part of actually becoming a data informed or evidence based organization or workforce. So you might be able to interpret them, but then what's the next step? How do we actually take that interpretation and that insight and translate it into action in some way? And being critical of things is really important, but being skeptical or curious are almost as, if not more important. Wondering where things came from, wondering the decisions that guide the way that we make choices, all of these things are really important in understanding where data come from and how they evolve. So I like to think of data people as comfortable with information. I think of data people as confident in interpreting and translating. So that means that you can interpret something and you can talk with your colleagues about it to figure out what kind of action you're going to take next. And you're curious about and critical of things that you hear and share. So oftentimes we say, oh, well, they put a number up there, so we're all set. Or, people aren't going to argue with the number. I mean, it's data after all. But we're going to talk through one really important example, and there's several that I teach, so I can always pull up others if people are curious about them. There are ways that, we just accept data, but as data people, we're a little more curious and skeptical is a strong term, but maybe just a little, um, strongly critical or lightly critical of the things that we see. So we don't necessarily say, oh, whenever someone says to me, 75% of something said something, I say, okay, cool. What was your source? When did those people say that? Who are the people? I have lots of questions. This is the curse of being a data person. So I want everyone to just, for a moment, you don't have to unmute, but if you want to, I'm going to encourage you to say to yourself, I'm a data person. I'm going to pause and take a sip of coffee while you do that. Did everyone do that? I would
I'm
love
a
it if
data
people.
person.
Yes. I don't know who said that. I didn't have it unmuted.
That's Aaron.
Thank you.
No problem.
See, I've taught this workshop for um, similar versions of this workshop for other adults. And I know folks are off camera, and maybe you roll your eyes, and that's fine. I've actually made adults stop and say this aloud because truly, when I was at the Office of Early Childhood, I worked with a whole agency of folks, many of whom felt interested in data, but were worried about, did they have the skills? They didn't feel like they were the expert. Becoming the expert and having the confidence in these skills takes time, but it also takes acceptance that you know your stuff, you know your project, you know your program, you know the nuances in the information. All of that makes the quality of the data, the analytics we generate from it, better and stronger. So just know that, even if deep down in Yiddish we say in your kishkis, you feel like you're not a data person, you are using data all the time. And there's nothing, all the great data uses we have out in the world should translate very easily into our work. So that's why we're here today. Thank you for humoring me. So first thing around strengthening data literacy is to notice data around you. Actually, I didn't snap a picture of this the other day. I was on social media and I noticed that an organization or a business called Massage Envy had a pie chart of all the reasons why you should patronize their business. I took a screenshot of it because I'm going to try and recreate it and figure out what the percentages are. But they were using the sort of the convention of a data visualization to capture your attention. And I can't remember if it was around Valentine's Day or it was around some other business opportunity that they had. But I noticed it. I was curious about it. And I took a little screenshot of it because I wanted to use it later in a discussion. Now, that's my own curse. But remember that there's data all around you. When you see facts and figures, you should be looking for the source. And we're going to talk about that up next. Before I move on, any questions or thoughts or things you're wondering about? Okay. Liz, thanks for that note on the chat. I think everyone does love data, just don't realize it. So most people think, or often this is sort of why people think they are not data people, because data are neutral, they're objective, and if you don't understand those data, there's something wrong with you. Or if it's complicated or generated from a really complex, um, what's the word I'm looking for? A complex analysis. If you don't get it, it's something about you. But the truth is that people don't like to argue with something with numbers. So most people think that data are neutral and objective, but data have to come from somewhere. So I want to walk us through a specific example especially, I haven't done this with state colleagues. This is kind of fun. I've taught a few of these examples to community partners, but this one I think is really meaningful to us because it impacts us and our work specifically. So um, Governor loves a ranking. I mean, we all like rankings, I think. It helps us know like you're the best at something. You don't enter a race to not know where you stand in the rankings, whether you know you're going to be number one or you know you're going to be the last place person. Sometimes it helps, putting things in order helps our brains cognitively understand how we improve, where we stand in comparison to other people. Comparisons and ordinal rankings are really, really important. Um, so in this case, this actually, it's dated 2021. So I remember when this came out, as the governor put a press release out and said, well, Connecticut is ranked, I think it was number 5 in the best states to have a baby. And data people are going to wonder, well, where exactly does this ranking come from? So first of all, this is just a screenshot of the header on the article. And you can see, first of all, there's a couple clues to really glean here. When I think of best and worst states to have a baby, I think of the sort of the things that are family friendly, maybe some community things that might be helpful to me as a new parent. I am a parent. I have 2 daughters. They're 11 and 13. Uh, I might think a little bit about, some of the geographic components or maybe some health-oriented things. This is actually coming from from a financial organization. So this is a financial writer, and Wallet Hub is the name of the organization that created these rankings. So what I do is I go straight to the methodology. On the left is a screenshot of their methodology. So data aren't neutral because in order to come up with a list of the top states to have a baby, you have to collect a whole lot of data. And then you have to take those data, all those rows and columns, and transform them, combine them in some kind of analytical way with some kind of analytical process. So whenever I see this kind of ranking, the first thing I want to do is I want to go straight to the methods and see how they did it. I don't have them included in this conversation today, but the same applies to the US News and World Report. The same applies to anything in Yelp or um, TripAdvisor. Anytime there's any kind of ranking, there's going to be components that are somehow human centered. And so that means that they're not necessarily neutral and objective. I heard someone maybe unmute, so I just want to make sure if anyone had a question, I didn't want to miss you. And no worries if you don't have a question. So let's jump into the methodology for a second. In order to figure out where the best and worst states to have a baby, the Wallet Hub team actually decided on a couple of big key ideas, you know, key data points that they wanted to look for. The cost of having a baby, healthcare, so I'm assuming that means baby and parent healthcare, baby friendliness, and family friendliness. I felt like cost and healthcare are pretty potentially objective measures because cost is something that you can actually if you can get access to something like the all payers claims database, you might be able to get at the cost of something, or if you were to talk with insurance companies to get their insurance data. And availability of healthcare, well, I don't have this I don't have a little arrow showing you what this means. um, these are more, I would say, more objective. Baby friendliness and family friendliness are two sort of subjective measures. And you can see that baby friendliness is a total of a certain number of points. Um, in this case, there's some statistical processes that were applied to the data. So they were weighted, and then there were scales generated. So there's some things happening behind the scenes that I'm not going to go fully into today. But in terms of baby friendliness, there were actually a number of things that this organization pulled in together. And you can see they're listed here, things like parental leave policies, which were scored, which means somebody had to read qualitative data and apply some kind of rubric to it. Mom groups per capita, which I think is really fascinating because I had a long conversation with my daughters about how moms are not the only parents. There's 2 parents, which is why you're not a mother's helper, you're a junior babysitter. Child care centers per capita is something that actually is, of all these measures here, is probably the most objective, um, as well as the share of nationally accredited child care centers. I happen to know from my work at the Office of Early Childhood that those are things that our state agency could actually help generate. Um, Birth rate and state policy for Medicaid covering parent programs. So those are things that are, um, you know, you can't help it if you're a state with a low or high birth rate, but those are things that are considered, maybe if it's a higher birth rate, there are more babies being born. So thus maybe there's more baby friendly policies. So this is definitely a subjective list. We could think a little bit about some of the things that we might think are more baby friendly or would be included in a measure of baby friendliness. I could say baby friendliness all day. And then family friendliness is actually just based on another rankings that they have, the best and worst states to raise a family. So you can see that this is kind of like a matryoshka doll of data points. It's 4 data points, and then within baby friendliness, there's 6 data points, and within family friendliness, there's a whole other methodology. So when you see something like this, what you need to know is that there's probably, they say, 31 relevant data points that they're bringing in together. So the data are not neutral. They had to come from somewhere. So as you're working on your American Rescue Plan funded projects and programs, whether you're working on agency business, remember that you get to decide what you collect, how you transform those data, and what you do with the insights that you generate. I want to pause for a second and see if folks have any thoughts or reactions, things they thought were missing. Actually, let me go back for a second. Things you would have, things you have questions about that you see here, or things you are that are you would have expected to see that you don't see. Anything that surprised you. It's always fun to do this with the U.S. News and World Reports ranking because I think people think they know what that represents. And then when you get into the pie chart that they published, um, it's really surprising. All, and Jonathan, thanks for the comment. Nearly all of these rankings have a methodology baked in somewhere into their flashy visualization. So you can nearly always get down to brass tacks. They don't always share the data or the processes, and that's one big benefit when we publish data stories, and we're about to publish. I should say it here so that way I hold myself to it. We have a dashboard of all the American Rescue Plan project funding that's happened so far. It's very high level, but it'll be published hopefully this week. And we also make the visualizations, the data that's sort of underneath the visualizations available on our state's open data portal. We're also a governmental agency, so we have some transparency that we need to adhere to. WildHub doesn't have that necessarily, but nearly always, they share their methodology. The reason I'm digging into the methodology and belaboring it is I think when, especially people who are newer to this work, they hear data, they kind of panic. And then you hear data and you think, oh, well, it's a percentage. And like that definitely means somebody did math and that math is airtight. And the truth of the matter is that these data are subjective. We could make different choices and it might yield different findings. And often a big part of the analytical process is testing out, for instance, does it matter if you have childcare centers per capita and share of nationally accredited childcare centers? Or is it okay if you just have one of these and you weight it heavier? And those are kind of big decisions. We just did a really fun project for the um, our folks in aging and figuring senior center allocations. And we worked with them around thinking about, well, which matters more if we weight something this way or if we think about it per capita. And we did a little work together to sort of partner. And so, one of the things that I want to kind of continue to reinforce is that if you're curious about the choices that you're making, the form that you're designing, the data collection that you're putting together, you're worried it won't be compliant with the American Rescue Plan compliance guidance, reach out, talk with us about it. And I see some comments about the survey population absolutely makes a huge difference. Around election time when you hear polls, if you're attuned to political news, you might know exactly when people are having a gaffe or having a rough day, and then you hear some poll and you have to say, oh, was that poll done before or after? Oftentimes, journalists now will even contextualize it and say, polls show the presidential rating is highly unfavorable. And this was done before he did something really unfavorable. So, in some cases, the context really matters a lot. We're going to talk about that in a second. Um, and the other thing is that it's really, if you expect to find something like Ramona's saying, it's also really hard not to see something different. So you're humans, you're human people making these choices. So the data come from somewhere, and I think that it's really important not to sort of belabor the point. This I like to think of it in this life cycle kind of setup. And my dad, who has been teaching biology for over 50 years, would love this little graphic because we think that this data collection, once you decide upon it, that it's fixed forever. And often we find when we get to the data analysis stage that maybe some of the ways that we collected information were sort of set up our measurement aren't really going to work. For instance, folks are right now deciding about some of the demographic characteristics they might be collecting as they set up their projects and programs. Should we collect people's actual income or should we collect it in categories? Well, you can always group them in categories if you have the actual number, but sometimes people don't want to tell you the actual number and they feel more comfortable giving it in categories. Are you even going to use that information down the road if we want to show something related to these income categories? We can't do it if we don't have it. Maybe we don't need it down to that granular, dollar sign level detail. So these are really important things as we kind of do the designing. And you should know that because it's subjective, it doesn't mean that it's set in stone. Some of our technology systems might be set in a little more stone, but the way we think about the data, the way we improve the quality of it, that's not necessarily set in stone. And um, once you get to generating those insights, you get to report and choose, I wouldn't say cherry pick necessarily, but I would say guide your audience to see the things that are important for them to know to make the decisions and move along. And it doesn't just end with the reporting. You go right back to continuing to collect data and things that you discover in this analysis phase should help you when you report because then you come back to collecting data and you can say to your colleagues, oh, you know what? We really need to focus on making sure that this one particular field is very complete. Last quarter, it was probably 50% complete, which means we couldn't really use those data. So once you have the data, it doesn't mean that, you have to actually it doesn't mean you are going to have an impact just because you have data on the spreadsheet or in a whole bunch of survey forms or on paper. You have to actually do this whole analytical process to get information and insight. And then there's this whole kind of like, what do we do next? So first you kind of run this process, you get to this reporting, and then you have to think about what do we do with that reporting? What do we want to push people to think about? And having strengthening your own data literacy will help you in this process because you will be able to actually prioritize what you want to share, what you think is going to be useful to people in their work, and what you think people should take action on. Sometimes you generate insights about things that technically your agency can't take action on. By way of an example, so I mentioned earlier that I've been in state service. I started my state service as the Chief Research and Planning Officer at the Office of Early Childhood. And one challenge that we always faced was that early childhood programs range. I mean, it has many programs across state government, with the exception of WIC, under the roof of the OEC, um, which just means that just like education policy is also health policy, is also food policy. The same works for early childhood. So when we were surveying parents, we were careful because we didn't want to add, we wanted to make sure that parents felt heard and provided us with data that we could generate insights and learn from. But we can't pull every lever on everything, and it's also not our responsibility as an agency to do so either. So that's one challenge, is that you might actually find from your data a problem that as your organization, you're not necessarily, you don't have the authority to fix. But that insight could have you partner with your sister or brother agency and say, here's something we're noticing in the data. Maybe we can find a way to develop a project together or to address this together. Maybe it's communication with our client population or with our staff. So there's lots of ways that we can actually use information to get these insights. But the next step, the action step, is always a little bit challenging. But at the heart of everything, most of the time for us, data are people. And having strong data literacy helps you improve all of these processes so that at the end of the day, we can serve the people that we serve better. And I know as a data person, sometimes people can think like you're a little bit of a robot or an automaton, talking about data and charts and spreadsheets. But at the end of the day, I know that those rows and columns contain really important information about how to improve people's lives. The more the stronger my data literacy is, the more questions I ask, the better I'm able to serve them. So this whole section of this morning's conversation was really meant to kind of really drive home the idea that data come from somewhere. The data are not neutral, and that as leaders, everyone in this conversation has a place in the design and the analytics and the storytelling and reporting of the data that you generate. So just remember, as you strengthen your own data literacy, as you work to build a data culture within your organization, you have to remember data come from somewhere, and there are human interventions all along that life cycle to improve the quality of what you're able to say and what you're able to do. So always consider those sources, always consider those human interaction points, that methodology, the choices that people are making. This should probably say sources and choices, so that we don't necessarily just assume that data are neutral and objective, because at the end of the day, they really aren't. And it's our job to actually have the conversations we should have, and um, challenge one another around the choices that we're able to make, so that we can actually generate really great data. So I'll pause again. Folks have questions. Thought Thoughts are also great. You can share the thoughts in the chat. You could unmute and share the thoughts. You could raise your hand. As the parent of two teenagers, I don't mind a silence for a moment. Seeing no thoughts right here. Uh, might be wondering, if I wanted to work on my own data literacy, and for folks who came to building a data culture last week, this is going to look a little familiar. Uh, you have to start where you are. So um, one of my, in this work that I've been doing, one of the biggest challenges is not panicking, because for many folks, let's be really clear, especially with the American Rescue Plan funded work, sometimes the funding is adding on to funding that's already in motion. I've learned in the transportation world, this is called plus up funding. So you're expanding upon something that you're already doing. And in that case, maybe you already have a data system or a form that you use or a process that you use. You staff already trained, and you as a newly forming data person are saying, "Oh no, I don't really even know how to interject here." It could be that you're starting something brand new, and the idea of that is so overwhelming. Of designing a whole new form, or how are we going to collect this? What is it only going to be in spreadsheets? And I'm not sure I have the spreadsheeting skills to handle that. So I actually have in a different presentation, I have a slide that says don't panic, because really you have the evaluation impact unit and my data and policy analytics colleagues as sounding boards, thought partners. We're really excited to partner on this work. But really, starting where you are means thinking about what you already have to help guide your work. In the building a data culture conversation last week, we talked a lot about mission. That could be your agency's mission. It could be the mission of the project or program you're running with this funding. It might be outlined in the public act. It might be a sentence you got from a colleague that says you're going to run this program and here's the goal. You've got some place to start from, and that's usually like a big picture goal. Some big ticket, big North Star kind of thing. What difference does it make if? What impact will this have? And then there's the questions that you kind of carve out of that big mission to understand, how are we doing this? How well are we doing this? And then that evidence is really, what do you already have? What do you already have in your backyard that you could use to make sure that you can answer those questions? Rather than talking through all these points, because that's part of a different conversation, join us next Tuesday, same time, same channel. I want to focus here on the questions piece. Because I think when it comes to strengthening data literacy, a big part of that curiosity, skepticism, critical eye is all around asking questions and matching questions with evidence. Um, I'm a social scientist by training, and so when I work with undergraduate researchers, often they have to come up with a research question. It's very similar here. It's really not that different. And you have a question, and then you have the evidence that you use to answer that question. So if you know what kinds of questions you're trying to answer, you can evaluate whether or not you have the right evidence. So if you work with me and we start talking about your project, I mean, I get really into the weeds really quickly. Often I'll step back and I'll put on my technology hat for a second or my researcher hat and I'll say, well, what do we really want to say when we're done all of this? Or a technologist might say, what problem are we trying to solve? And then you want to make sure you have the right evidence to show that you solved a problem or that you made progress on a thing or that you have that story to tell. So questions and data are like peanut butter and jelly. There are like um, bacon and eggs, if that is your breakfast food of choice. They are like peas in a pod. So if you are focused just on the data conversation, what data should we collect? And we talked about that last week as well. Um, Often it's really useful rather than saying, what should we collect, to step back and say, what question are we trying to solve? So what data are we going to need? And data come in so many forms. So most of the time people think, oh, I have to go out and take a survey. But oftentimes you might have some administrative data in your own backyard, in your own data system. This is like the most basic. There's sort of quantitative information, that's sort of things that come in pure number form, and qualitative information, things that come in more text, word, observation form. But the distinction between these two things is really fine because often we still have to apply a qualitative sort of summary of the quantitative data in order to share it. I can't just like throw numbers at you, though many people will. It's not the strongest way to represent data. I could show you a table and be like, well, you can see in the table. It's easier if you help your audience understand what they see, and vice versa. I could have lots and lots of qualitative responses to something, but it's going to be easier for me to understand that as an audience if someone applies, some kind of quantitative schema. How many? Were they more positive, more negative? So all of these kinds of data, no one is better than the other. I think the next thing is there's no one way to collect it. So you could do this in conversation via survey, making observations. And if you're wondering which version of data are best or which method is best, the answer is always it depends. It depends on your question. It depends on your story. It depends on a lot of things. So as you're thinking about the way that you help shape the data collection for your project or program, for your agency, you need to think a lot about the question you have and what data best matches it. So it depends on if you have questions you want to answer at all, because collecting data for data's sake is never a good look. Um, it's important, and we haven't experienced this yet with the U.S. Treasury Department, but right now they're collecting a lot of data quarterly. Folks on this call have participated in that data collection. When I was in the Office of Early Childhood, I worked with the Administration for Children and Families as our federal funder, and I submitted data to them quarterly. They never really understood what they did with it, what their questions were. So imagine now you're a client in the field, or often our clients were childcare providers. There's just so overworked and underpaid and stressed out, and you're collecting information for them. You're never reflecting it back to them, telling them what your questions are so you can get some data and answer them and reflect it back. So being a good data partner is definitely a future conversation. um, will analysis of your data get you answers to those questions? Do you have enough? This is a big question we get all the time. How big is the sample that you have or the client population? Are you going to want to tell, which data should you collect or which process that you use depends on, do you want to break your data into groups to make comparisons? Do you want data to be collected over many points in time, in which case you have to be really patient? Um, so the third action step here is to find the data that you have already on hand. Last week in the Building a Data Culture conversation, we talked a little bit about you already as an agency or a project or a program might have a data catalog, but you want to find the data you already have, because in order to know which one is best, you need to know what you already own. And then you need to run some of these questions. Does the data even answer the questions I have? If we don't have enough, what are we going to do to actually fill in some of the gaps? And maybe we want to break into groups, but we don't have enough diversity in our sample to be able to do that. So, in summary, data come from somewhere, and turning data into insights depend on a number of further steps. So remember at the very beginning of the conversation, we talked a lot about that it's possible that today you might be hoping to see some more technical skills, spreadsheeting, maybe even some data visualization, because data literacy is like all about reading those things. But in this last section, what I just want to reiterate is that uh, data literacy involves knowing that there's subjectivity, finding out what kind of questions that you have, and figuring out what data you have on hand. And then there's this whole turning data into insights bit. And it's not an insignificant process. When we talk about this phase right here, this data analysis phase, or this information and insight phase, you have to work through these big stages. Um, Getting your data out of your data system, cleaning it and getting it into a state that where it could be transformed or manipulated to do some analysis. And then once that analysis is complete, actually extracting the important insights to tell that story. Uh, Most people want to talk about this slide right here, all of these steps. And I actually think that there's probably a workshop where we go through every one of these separately, or where our team comes and works with your agency directly around these steps. Who does what, who has the authority to do different things, or the permissions, or the roles in the data system. But honestly, if you don't back up and have the philosophical conversation around the mission and the questions, in some cases, you can get to this phase and do all of these steps and have a whole list of insights in a table, and it doesn't actually answer the questions that you have, or you're not really sure what to do with it. So I've had conversations with folks about sort of the content of these workshops, and most of the time people want to like see things happen. And I can do that in a separate discussion, but all these really sort of like crucial steps of walking through what are you trying to do? How do you measure impact? What do you think you're going to show? What kind of story do you want to tell? All of those things really strengthen the quality of the data you'll collect, or that you're already collecting but can improve upon, so that when you get to this phase, when you extract the data, you'll discover that it's mostly complete rather than incomplete or have lots of missing pieces. When you go to clean the data, you'll find that you don't really have that much data management, because at the end of the day, everything you have is there and you only have to do minimal matching or merging. When you go to do your analysis, you actually get insights, as opposed to discovering that maybe a lot of things are missing. And missing data or poor quality data are some of the chief reasons why we can't say anything at the end of the day. And if all of these steps, this extraction and management and analysis, all happens, then you actually have a story to tell. So I want to pause for a moment, because it's not an insignificant slide. There's a lot of text here, and most of the things you need to know are in the things I just said. But anything here that sort of sparks for you, oh, wow, I never even thought about where I get the data, or oh, I've never been responsible for the data management, but is that something I should know more about? So think about that life cycle of your project, program, or agency, and start exploring the steps that actually get you through these different pieces. Because every project is going to have maybe a new or revisiting where the data come from, what you're going to do with the data. And you might be new to this process. So you might not necessarily know what role you play or what authority you have to get access to things. This is a good time to kind of sanity check that. Once you start exploring that data lifecycle, you can go back to the beginning of the conversation and ask some of those questions. Why did we make the decision to collect it this way and not that way? What more information do we need to answer some of the questions we think will be asked either by Treasury or by our agency executives or by our brother and sister agency colleagues? Um, so notice the data around you to strengthen your data literacy. Consider those sources. Look for that data catalog. What do you already have? Does it answer your questions? And start that exploration of that data lifecycle. Um, Once you kind of start to do these things, ask those questions, you'll get yourself a little bit closer to strengthening your own literacy around the project in front of you. And you'll find that when you're in another conversation, and I've observed this happening over time in my former agency, it's really beautiful. Someone will say, "Oh, I see you've collected this. Well, how did you do that?" Or how are we going to show the impact? I know we say we're going to do it, but how can we show it? I see a couple of comments. Cleaning data can be a lot of work, Carl, and I absolutely agree. That's a space where I think skill wise, I think most folks probably would struggle a fair amount. So that's something we can talk. And I don't know if we're talking about hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of clients, um, but the data quality piece cannot be overstated. There's a continuous quality improvement discussion that we could certainly have in the future because data cleaning helps you improve the data collection as well. At Ramona, this is a really important point that you've raised. Not just the sourcing, but who's the funder. Because oftentimes, we do live exactly in a communication world where there are people who are able to push and sponsor and work algorithms so that they can get more eyeballs on their research that is already a little bit skewed. So I think that it's really important that, you know, as state funders and as a state organization, it's really important for us to actually be aware of these things so that they don't skew our own work and we're able to push back against things, especially things that cast our work in a negative light. So, like I said in our last conversation, both at the kickoff and in the building a data culture conversation, we have a lot of plans to put together more workshops for folks around things that you need to improve your own skills. We know that there's a need to build analytical skills, and we know that everyone's not in the same place, so that there's probably a basics and an advanced kind of grouping. Survey informed design is something that I think this is a really important conversation, both to talk about when to survey and when not to survey, as well as how to build your own skills designing forms and surveys. People love to talk about data storytelling. There's some great philosophies around when to use what kind of data visualizations and how to actually build a data story. And we have some great data storytelling tools, technology tools available to us as a state organization that my colleague Pauline Zaldonis manages for the state. So that's definitely something we can talk about. We've got some great trainings coming up. So I'm actually going to stop sharing in a second so I can share a bunch of things with you. But finally, something that we're really excited about is working around just creating data visualizations using some new tools. And again, most times people want to come to these workshops because they really want me or others to show them how to make a great chart or a great interactive visualization. And all that's fine, except that it's not possible to make something super compelling or exciting without great data. And great data come from great questions, looking at your mission, having a strong data culture, and having great data literacy. That's why we're starting with this conversation. I'm hoping that it's beneficial to folks, sparking some ideas and curiosity. So we've now had building data capacity and strengthening data literacy once. So next week, we're going to go back to the top and we're going to try building data capacity again, see who we draw in. So please tell your friends and colleagues. We are running these workshops. I'm hoping that folks will continue to join them as I know this group has a fair amount of overlap from last week. I'm really grateful for your engagement. And then at the end of the month, we are going to do strengthening data literacy again. And each time we run these workshops, we're going to be incorporating feedback that we hear. So they'll be mostly the same, but maybe not exactly the same. So you may learn something new by listening in. Um, at the top of our conversation, I shared that every time we have these workshops afterwards, we will hold FAQ hours. So if you want to ask some questions about American Rescue Plan, data, research, evaluation, anything broadly writ, please join from 10 to 11. And this is the contact information for myself, for our research analyst, Augusta Irachuku. And you can always reach out to the rest of the data and policy analytics team at OPM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop sharing for a moment and share a few links in the chat with everyone. So we have a great training coming up, and that training is on the Open Data Portal. So I'm going to quickly grab the link for that so I think I have the flyer saved. I'm going to attach the flyer in the chat here. This is training for the Open Data Portal, which is, you might have an agency data officer um, in your own agency, but this is open to anyone who has access to these state resources. I'm getting a little reminder that says I can't do what I wanted to do, but that's okay. I'm going to continue to try. Oh, there we go. It's shared. Just took a second. I'm going to share again the link to office hours after this conversation. If you'd like to be added to upcoming workshops, please reach out and I'm happy to add you. I'm going to pause before I share the feedback form to see if anyone has questions, thoughts, feedback, ideas, all the things. This is your workshop. I did do a lot of talking, but it's okay because I'm going to stop talking now and see if folks have any ideas or questions. Well, last week um, we had about a 25% response rate. 25% sounds really big, but we were 16 people. So 25% means we had 4 people respond on the feedback form. So please, we have about 22 people in this week's workshop. So that is definitely more than last week. And even if you attended last week and wanted to offer feedback on last week, that's great too. But I'd really appreciate hearing. I've actually designed this form, and I'm not thrilled with the design of the form. In the future, when we teach survey and form design, I'm going to use this evaluation form as an example of maybe not the greatest form. Um, but we know we're dealing with small audiences and small numbers. So any feedback you can offer, things you were expecting to learn, things you didn't see us share today. We're really glad that you joined us. And I'm going to be assembling an email list of all the folks that attend. There's no easy way to do this because everyone's hearing about the workshops in different ways from different colleagues or different sources. So I'm going to be putting together my own sort of homegrown, home-sewn email list. So just be sure to be in touch. Let us know if you have feedback or questions. Offer feedback on the form. And I'm really grateful that you were able to attend today. And we'll find a way to share this video afterwards as soon as we have a chance to assemble that email list. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.